Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, as part of our contemporary French film series, we're presenting the 1993 production, The Scent of Green Papaya, written and directed by Tran Anh Hung. This film won a major prize at the Cannes Film Festival and was successful commercially around the world. It tells the story of a little servant girl in Vietnam in the 1950s and her observations of a Vietnamese family. Yes, and this is a film actually spoken in largely Vietnamese, although shot completely on a sound stage in France by Tran. We'll be talking about that and a number of other things after today's screening. It's a pleasure to welcome back to City Cinematheque La Francis Hui, the film curator of the Asia Society. Now, take this journey to Vietnam in the early 1950s in The Scent of Green Papaya. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to see a film that took home a major prize from Cannes in 1993 and was both a critical and commercial success in France and around the world, including a very warm reception here in the United States. And I think after looking at this film, it is one of those first films that announces a major global talent and really put Vietnam on the international film scene in a particular kind of way. We have 30 minutes to talk about that and a number of other things, and it's a pleasure today to welcome back to City Cinematheque La Francis Hui. La Francis is the film curator at Asia Society here in New York, and as such, it is her professional duty to keep up on exactly filmmakers like today's Tran Anh Hung. Welcome back to City Cinematheque.
Thanks for having me again.
Great, great. So let's just start with the whole notion of the representation of Vietnam in the cinema that we've seen, particularly as people living in North America. But what do you think distinguishes this film just off the bat as a film that says, I'm going to show you Vietnam?
I mean, this film is just extraordinary because it is a film that is not about wars, it's not about atrocities, it is not about American experiences on the battlefield, and it is not about French colonial nostalgia of Indochina. It is a film about Vietnamese people living their daily life and with a Vietnamese cast and made by a filmmaker of Vietnamese descent. So all these combined together, it is really a film about the humanity of Vietnamese people.
Right, absolutely the case. Tell us just a little bit about the filmmaker, La.
Well, Tran Anh Hung, he's Vietnamese French. He grew up in Vietnam, and when he was about 13, I think it's 1975, right, he moved to France with his family and never returned to Vietnam until 1991. And that was just a few years after Vietnam had this reform policy and opened it once again to the world. And he returned back, and he's fascinated by that world, and at the same time feeling very foreign.
Right.
It's familiar and foreign at the same time, and he decided to make this film. And in fact, later on, he made two other films that are set in Vietnam.
And shot in Vietnam,
Yes.
the other two films.
Yes, and then we'll talk about this one where it's shot later.
Yeah, okay, exactly. So what we have is, but what you've already brought up is we're having somebody who has this double perspective. He's both an insider of the culture, formed there, but with a break, and then with his professional training and education in France. Well, let's go to. I mean, this is a film that's very powerful just to watch and to listen to. Apart from, we'll discuss story and characters, and so it has a very strong reality effect. Now, I'm not saying exactly its style is realism, but it has this powerful "you are there" effect. I mean, it inserts us into this intimate and family life, and following on your point, there's this, humanization that happens as a consequence of that. But that's why where he shot this is very interesting. So reveal it to us.
Okay. If you remember the beginning sequence of the film, this young girl, 10-year-old, she walks down an alley. She knocks on this door. She's looking for this household where she's going to work for the next 10 years of her life. A woman opens up the door, and then a very elaborate tracking shot.
Absolutely.
It goes from the front of the house through a courtyard, and then perhaps a living room, and then the bedroom. And then you wonder, this is strange because there must be a track for the camera to stay on to make that elaborate shot. And in fact, this film, the whole set was built on a sound stage in France.
Right.
And it's basically based on the director's memories of Vietnam, how the houses should look like. And in fact, if he were to make the film in Vietnam, I'm not sure if he could find a house like that. He might have to also build a house.
Well, no, I think that's a point very, very well taken because, you know, this is now a film that is set some 60 years in the past, and this is a country that has not only gone through a war, but has gone through tremendous changes since the end of that war, which is over 35 years ago. So you're really talking about a bygone era. Just to underline for other people, his other two films that he shot in Vietnam, one, Ciclo, which takes place in the Saigon of the 1990s, he was able to shoot there, and it gives you just, I think, an equally sensuous portrait of the Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City, of that. And it's almost like a marker of the disappearance of this world in this film. I mean, to watch the two, you're saying, oh, my goodness, they're speaking the same language, it's the same city, but this is an utterly transformed world. The first film is a lost world when you see Ciclo, and then the other film, The Golden Ray of the Sun.
The vertical ray.
Vertical ray of the sun. I always get that. The vertical ray of the sun is set in contemporary Hanoi that gives us the modern northern city. So it's this, two films observing things today, and then one film that's unquestionably, such a strong memory piece.
Absolutely, and in fact, the filmmaker talked about that in interviews. It is about his memories of sensual experiences during childhood. It's based on memories of his own mother. It's like a woman who lived a life of devotion, taking care of the household. And what is really interesting is that when people think about their childhood memories, it's like dreams. Mm-hmm. You don't remember the actual sequence of events. You don't remember the big picture story, but you have snapshots of what happened. It's like colors. It's like in this film, you see the ants on the windowsill, dew dripping on a plant, and the papaya seeds, white and lustrous. Yeah. And those are the things you remember. It's like the texture of things. It's like the little moi touching a little box. And it's also the smell in the air. Right. And so those are the things that people remember.
Absolutely the case. Now I'm going to just add one, I'm in complete agreement with you. I want to just add one feature to that. And this is, of course, a tropical city. And it's a city, and it's tropical, and it's an era before the mass arrival, at least among certain classes, of air conditioning. And therefore, it has a very particular urban soundscape. And it's a mix that is certainly not a kind of Midtown Manhattan mix of any kind, because since it's a tropical country, things grow virtually everywhere. I mean, nature is uncontrollable, but yet you're in a house and you're in the city, so you hear the sounds of the neighborhood, you hear the sounds of the family. As many of my friends who live in tropical cities say, yes, you get to know your neighbors very well, whether you want to or not.
Yes.
But there's also even the sounds of nature, this complemented by, I think, a very wonderful musical score as well. But that sense of detail, of the texture of what it means to be in this household is handled, by this sound design and soundscape, just in the same way it's handled by the kinds of shots that you've pointed out to us.
Absolutely, and it is quite interesting because the filmmaker is trying to use studio lighting to create a sense of sunlight. And but the way he lights the sets is it's very uniform. It's like a one uniform light, and allowing everything to be shown without a sense of hierarchy. It's not like I'm trying to make you look at this mug, but not here.
Right.
Basically, you have the freedom to look anywhere you want and look at the details of each object.
No, I think it's a very, very important point, and that is also related to the pacing of the film and the story style of the film. First of all, the pacing, which I think is marvelous, but it may take some people a while to get used to, is the rhythm of a tropical city in which you move in a slower kind of way, because you need to preserve your energy. You don't really need to be bathed in sweat every every moment of the day, though there's that potential if you don't adapt, you know, in that particular way. But also, just as again as you just described, these long takes, whether it be a tracking shot or he holds the shot, and I think it's so, you've described it so well, this kind of non-hierarchical way in which we're allowed to inspect the image, which, by the way, it both gives it this hyper-realist quality that then pushes it, again, agreeing with you, into this dream kind of way in which, you know, well, wait a minute, if you just did this with a little bit more Renaissance perspective and chiaroscuro, I'd know what was important and what I should be looking at. But the frame is a kind of, it's a democratic memory of this. All the stuff kind of pops out in that same way.
And that's what I like about it, because it's at once very naturalistic, but also a little bit artificial.
Absolutely.
Because sunlight or natural light doesn't actually work that way. There are parts of the house that should be completely in a shadow. And, but at the same time, I like the fact that the filmmaker is not really trying to say that he knows everything about Vietnam. If you look at the story itself, it's like, is it actually really believable that this Moy never experienced major abuses? Nobody yelled at her. Everything seemed to be peaceful. I mean, you sense a little drama in the merchant family's history, the pain they went through, but at the same time is not very dramatic. And so you look at all these, and it is the director trying to not be pretentious about what he knows.
No, there is, while there's great artistry, there's a kind of humility about cultural knowledge. Now let me just push that point in one direction, again riffing on something you said earlier, which would be different from the kind of colonial nostalgia you get in certain kinds of films, in which and we're talking very specifically about a French tradition here, in which there's a kind of imperial gaze on the filmmaker because they're creating a complete fantasy of the past with that kind of assertion that I know everything about this, and I'm going to give you all the pleasure that comes from all of my knowledge. Whereas here there is, as you've pointed out so well, there's this, I know a slice of this, and let me do my best to communicate that through my memories and through how that works.
That's exactly true. I think Tran has this great sense of humility. It's like I'm very close to that culture, but at the same time I feel foreign. And so he is stepping back a little bit and also trying to make this film as personal as possible. He's not trying to make some grand statements about women's life, the politics of Vietnam. It's just like the way he experienced Vietnam when he was a kid.
Right. Well, and let me bring this back to something we've already started talking about style, because, you know, sometimes when a filmmaker uses close-ups typically have two kinds of uses. One, some kind of dramatic emphasis. You go to the face, or you go to the hand at a particular moment, or you go to a symbolic object or gesture. And what's very interesting about these is that they don't serve either of those functions. The close-ups tend not to forward plot or character revelation in some way. They tend to forward our sense of of a kind of being there-ness. And I mean, the papaya seeds are no political symbol or direct sexual symbol. They're evocative of the sensuous nature of being in this particular place, but it's not linked to like, oh, this is a symbol of her this or that. And that's all part of his, you know, struggle over representation. It's hard enough to get these things right.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, I don't think anybody who's seen this film, because I believe you used the word lustrous, everyone always remembers those seeds.
Of course, and when you look at those seeds, you can sense the moisture.
That's right.
And you were talking about close-ups of human beings. If you see the skin, you feel the warmth in the air.
I think you're absolutely.
So I think the filmmaker is very effective in bringing forth those senses.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you know, for example, the representation, because this is of women in the film. This is a family chronicle narrative. We do this, but we enter this world through a young woman, and ultimately the film begins with images of her searching on the street, and the film ends with her, you know, perched almost in the throne-like position in a home. So what do you make of the representation of women in this film?
It is very interesting because women are really central to this whole film. You see Moy, and then you see this other older maid,
right,
and also the mistress of the household. They are the people, the only people who work.
Right.
And the men are there for pleasure. There's the husband, the master of the household. He plays music and he goes out to find other women.
Right.
And the women take care of business. And what is really interesting is that when you look at a film that have all these women doing living their life and taking care of business, taking care of their households, it's very easy to look at that as a feminist text.
Right.
And I'm going to bring up a very extreme example. Something I thought about when I was watching the film was Jean Dielman.
Yeah, by Chantal Ackerman, my colleague at City College these days.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And that film's such a significant and important feminist text because it forces you to experience the mundane life of women. It's like a woman waking up every day and repeating the day exactly as it was yesterday, going to the store to buy food, and then you go home to cook, and then you see in real time how the cooking process works. And very much like in this film, you see a lot of these details, like the Moy chopping the papaya,
absolutely,
and they're frying vegetable and meat in the wok. And but at the same time, you can also look at the film from a completely opposite way. It is a film that's not very critical of women's condition. The women are not making any complaints. They just completely submit to their circumstances.
Absolutely.
Moy is, okay, I have a limited life. I am just going to make the most out of it. I'm just going to take pleasure of all the little things that I see and I experience. And you see the mistress of the household, and she has a horrible husband, and she gets yelled at by the mother-in-law, but it's fine. She knows her duties. And so it is all very interesting. It's like, is it really a feminist text or it is not? But I think trying to think too much about that is really missing the point, because I don't think the filmmaker tries to make any statement.
Well, I'm gonna be in agreement with you on that. I'm gonna use a phrase for it. I think this is an historically lyrical film. That is, it wishes to evoke the experience of these characters, and if their experience is one in which they don't have an understanding fully of their circumstances, and that it's not a film that's going to come and retrospectively impose our judgment upon those social relations. It's much more interesting in showing us how they experienced those. It's sort of like, I've used this in class occasionally, sort of like the difference, may sound like a strange analogy, but between Rocky and Raging Bull. You know, in Rocky, he is just the wonderful, misjudged guy that the whole world doesn't understand, and the film is always on his side. And Jake LaMotta, what do we make of Jake LaMotta? And Scorsese has talked about that. He just wants to capture who this person was as opposed to judge who the person was. And he, in this, coming back to the notion of memory film in this, he wants to portray what the social relations were within family life at this particular moment as they were experiencing it. And then you and I, you know, as spectators of a different age, like we can debate what that meant or where it's going to go. You know, that also brings up this issue of the two-part structure of the film, because it's Mui who is our female that we're following it through, but we see her at these two different ages. We see her as, you know, around 10 or so, and then we see her around 20 or something like this. So what do you make of that? I mean, of seeing her in the two ages?
It is kind of an interesting choice. It's not like a slow progression, like 10 and 12, 15, 17, and 20. Yeah. But in a way, I think the film is slow. It is the filmmaker has to come up with a strategy to be able to present her life, and pretty much every day is the same. Right. And how do you present that? And at the age of 20, something quite dramatic happens to her. I mean, the family's finances fall apart, and she has to be sent to a different home. And that part of the story is just as interesting as the previous part. The previous part has a lot to do with childhood memories, or the memories of sensual experiences. And then the second part, it becomes something quite different. And her relationship with this pianist is really ambiguous.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think one of the things that's also very interesting is that we are in this segment. We historical spectators have a very strong notion that there's something waiting just off stage, and that is going to be the absolute, I mean, tumult of America's engagement in Vietnam, and that's only hinted at by the sound of the jets. And of course, we're in Saigon, and the pianist is still utterly. He's come back proudly from France as a complete remaining Francophile. This is not somebody who is fighting against colonialism, and he and his girlfriend are people who feel they're being incorporated into a sophisticated contemporary moment. And then we have that, and then we have her observing this. But I think that there's a way in which we as spectators are always aware that these characters are eventually going to be acted upon by history in a way we know that they can't possibly know, because they can't foresee that at the moment after this film ends, we can begin imagining multiple scenarios for what happened to them. That's why. Well, what do you make of that final image of the film?
Well, the thing is, like, it is easy to think of the ending as a happy ending. It's like, wow, Mui has crossed into a different socio-economic class, and she's in love with the pianist, and she's learning to read. She's not illiterate anymore. But I don't think the filmmaker actually ever tries to tell you things are going to be all great from now on. Nobody is saying that the pianist is going to marry her. And in fact, if you think about it, it's like Mui seems to have been in love with this pianist since she was a kid, but at the same time, It is questionable whether this is really an equal love relationship. When the pianist walks into her bedroom in the middle of the night, is there a chance for Moy to actually reject him?
Right. Well, the point. No. I think yours is a point very, very well taken about the fact, and he's teaching her to read. Okay, a good thing. But is that a tutor relationship, not a relationship of mutually shared feelings in that way? And she's smiling, but once again, this is Vietnam in the early 1960s. I mean, this city is going to be chaos.
Very soon.
Very, 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 very soon. We have to avoid chaos here on this show by coming to an end at an appropriate time. If you'd like more information about this particular series, more generally about City Cinematheque, or even more broadly about City University Television, please visit our website, www.cuny.tv. There you're going to find click-ons and links all about our programming, as well as some archival materials you can stream, as well as a link to be in contact with us by, no surprise, email. So please take the time to visit www.cuny.tv. La, a very fast and very rich 30 minutes. Thank you for joining us again. I look forward to your next visit on City.
My pleasure. I'd love to be here again.
Great. Super. And once again, thank you for joining us today on City Cinematheque, and please join us again as we stroll through the archives of film history. For now, it's bye-bye.